We're live. Hey Gary, how you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, good. For all of you OKUSA viewers out there, I've got the manager of Greco-Roman programs for USA Wrestling, Gary Mayabb. Gary, you're out of Kansas City, right?
I am right now.
Well, good. Well,
Yeah.
let's just update us a little bit. What's going on right now? I mean, obviously, we're trying to find our way here. I mean, with what's going to be happening is tournaments and as far as tournaments and things like that are going. What are you seeing?
Well, right now there's you nailed it. I mean, we're pretty fluid right now.
Yeah.
We've obviously got two events coming up in Iowa coming up. One at age group that's going to be huge. It looks like, and so looking forward to that. And I think senior nationals coming up 9th and 10th in Iowa City, and then the following weekend they're loaded again, and then hopefully we will get some word on U23 and juniors. And as we get those, we know that U23 they're going back and forth with just how to try to make it come off safely. And so as they're doing that, then we're the clock is ticking. So there's always two sides to this. You set the event, you want to hold it, but at the same point in time, safety issues, and then just what has happened pretty much throughout this whole summer, right?
Yeah.
We moved up to a date and then get to a date, and then hopefully you don't get to a spot where you either got to stop it or postpone it somewhere else. So hopefully that's where we're at right now. But UWW was supposed to have a meeting this coming week, and don't know now that's going to happen. So there may be a slight delay on that one. And with each delay, you're trying to figure out, okay, so trials procedure, getting trials in, naming a team, getting travel, all this is, and none of that can be done in a very quick turnaround. I mean, international travel is not and we don't even know what's open or not open yet. So just like a lot of things, I mean, it's up in the air. I think we're still hopeful in some areas, but at the same point in time, we're always going to, move towards the side of safety first.
Sure.
And go from there. So that's where we're at.
Well, good. Well, the Greco landscape looks really good right now. I mean, I've been talking to some on my podcast. I had an ex world member and Olympic member, and it looks to me like we've got some depth. I mean, we got some really good ones.
There's some things, and this is what is so unique about this whole process that we're currently in. When you go from, when we go from 8 weights or 7 weights at one point to 8 and then to 10, instead of going down, the Olympics says, all right, you're going to have 6 weights. Okay, we're going to have 10. And I think now that was just it's a great move.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at how many strong programs, I mean, you guys are involved in one, but you look at how many strong high school programs there are across the United States that run 2 varsity teams. And some of them say, well, you just name it varsity. No, that's not what does it. It's your schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got a second team, and a lot of people are like, if you've got a green and a silver or whatever they want to call it, so it's not 1 and 2, but whatever they call it, then if both of those teams have a true varsity schedule, then you're really dealing with a program now.
Sure.
And so those guys, they're not trying to move from JV to varsity. They're moving up. Well, if you take and maximize that, and now you're going to take a tremendous and stockpiling group, and then narrow that down to 6 out of 10. Now we've got all this movement that's going to happen, and then what's happening is we've got depth that on a typical year we might not have as much depth, although we are building depth currently.
Yeah,
and we're getting better in that area. Again, there was an 87% uptake a year ago at U23s, and so we know that there's an awful lot of college athletes that are starting to, either do both or move that direction.
Yeah.
It's good
So
for us.
we have now 10 weights, right? So it goes from 6 to 10 with 10 Olympic weights in Greco.
Six Olympic weights, but we've
Okay.
been wrestling this 10 weight class is what so what I'm
Yeah.
saying is we've got a whole group of people out there that have been wrestling at world weights.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now 4 of those weights are going to get discontinued for a year.
Oh.
And now they're going to matriculate into another weight. And as they move into those weights, what we're seeing is, it's creating depth that we did not have as much of in the previous year. We were starting to gain depth. I mean, you look at the depth that we have at 77 kilo and the guys that's there. And then you take and go down at the bottom in there where everyone at 55 is moving to 60. They have no choice.
Yeah.
And so they either set or they move up. And those guys are going to move up for the trials. And then you have a select group of guys that are at 63 and they're going down because they don't want to move up to 67. So and then you have that same kind of thing take place again and again.
So 60 is going to be loaded.
60 is going to be loaded. I mean, it's going to be a packed weight class.
Yeah,
which is awesome. I mean, and so many of those guys. I mean, Ildar has, he has set the mark really for that weight currently. But again, when you have newcomers moving into the weight, you have a few of his teammates that have been world team members multiple times that are now moving into that weight. And now some of those things will get really interesting.
Yeah.
And then you've got, when you look at that movement and then before, even before the movement at 55, there is 4 guys there that have traded off with one another on who defeated who. And so it's really going to be an interesting mix.
Well, that's cool. That's good to hear. I mean, well, again, I'm glad you're here with OKUSA. You're live with us. We wanted to bring you on and talk some Greco. We're at Oklahoma. We're trying to grow in the Greco space, with Zach Randall as our, our president, chairman. He's a Greco guy.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
He's going to do some big things here Greco wise. And of course, we got Sammy Hazelwinkle down here.
Right.
But what do you see, like, as far as OKUSA, the direction it's moving now? What are you thinking? I mean, what do you see?
First of all, Oklahoma is such a great state for wrestling, period. And when we use terms like wrestling's wrestling, especially at age group, where if we could hold athletes and move them forward on dual pathways for a little while and then let them make a choice, at some point in their career. I just interviewed for Moments Off the Mat with Brandon Paulson just this morning. And, between him and Sammy, those are 2 of the best examples. Brandon made a cadet world team in freestyle and got 4th. Wow. And then came back and then from that point on really turned to Greco, and we've been very fortunate to have him there, obviously.
Yeah.
And then when you look at Sammy and the success that he had, 2012 Olympian in freestyle, 208, the alternate in Greco. I was fortunate enough to sit in his corner in Greece when he won his university world title. And, just so much history there with him. And you go back even to his father, Dave, and his uncle, Jim, both of them were 2-time Olympians, 68, 72. It's amazing. I mean, that there's the kind of caliber athlete that is in Oklahoma as just a wrestler.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough a few years ago to go in and do an intro clinic. And when I was heading into the clinic, they were like, look, these guys they just need to understand some things on throw and getting thrown. So we spent about 45 minutes, but because of all of the basics that they already own, the basic, the position, motion, level change, penetration, lift, back, step, back, arch, that doesn't change. And they've got all of those skills already down. And so now all it is putting it into a package where the timing gets there. And between what, Dan has done down there, and then now Sam, and it's just, it's a very deep state for wrestling, and the culture has always been there, right? And those are things that, we can't teach, and you can't just build culture.
Right.
Building culture is every single day. And when you are in states, and one of them being Oklahoma, where your dad, your uncle, your great uncle, everybody wrestled, and it's it turns out a different group of athletes, and with expectations, and we know how much confidence makes a difference in wrestling. And so some of these guys I've worked with, they just look at it like, I can do this.
Yeah.
And that's a huge difference than someone that walks out on a mat and says, I don't want to get thrown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And those are intangibles that we're always looking for. But that's why, you look at the success that Oklahoma has had in the last recent years. They're at junior duels 2 years ago. My goodness, right? That was a great performance.
Yeah.
And so they've been doing amazing things. And there was a time where it seemed like it was starting to lull, and then it picked right back up again.
Oh yeah.
But again, it all starts at the top.
Sure.
Zach believes that Greco is important.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get people in leadership where there are more opportunities and training environments being established for the athletes, across the nation, everywhere I go, it's a very similar story. I have athletes that tell me things like, well, we have to drive an hour and 10 minutes each way to get to a Greco training site.
Yeah.
Okay. But you're doing it, right? Yes. But the problem with that is that how many other people are really willing to do that 2 times a week? And right, it's very difficult. If you're going to tell somebody that you're going to spend at least an hour and a half in a car each way, and you're going to have an hour and a half to 2 hour practice, that math, if you just keep doing it, that's what kind of makes us wrestlers, right?
Yeah.
We're pretty stubborn.
Yeah. Yeah. Just going to Stillwater or Norman, but for us, we're blessed in Tulsa. You got Broken Arrow. You got just a Broken Arrow alone. Outside of Tulsa,
right?
You don't have to look far to find a hammer to go train with.
No, and we know that hammers make hammers.
Oh yeah.
So that right there is, you're so right. But again, that a lot of that comes down to the culture of the state.
Yeah, I think Zach we've needed it. What he's bringing as far as the culture, especially in Greco. And I think I talked to Coach Ruth the last interview we did the other night, I think Wednesday night, and from like 13, maybe even 12 years old, like schoolboy, novice schoolboy, all the way up to 18 right now, we're so loaded. To find a spot on the team, to find a spot on the second team,
right,
at cadet and junior,
right.
But our schoolboy, both of our schoolboy teams, they were amazing. What they did in Indianapolis this past year. Yeah. So
absolutely.
We're blessed. We'd like to have you down though and do some more training. I remember in Tulsa, you came down.
Yeah.
I think that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, it was. Absolutely.
That was
great.
Good. Great. And we had some good kids in there. And
I love it because it is such a unique part of coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a little window there. When you work with athletes, most of the time, all success is long-term, and it takes long-term. And you don't even see the markers as the athletes are moving up because they're so small and incremental most of the time. But when you get to watch someone explode almost in front of you because of all of the basic skills, and when you mix the basic skills that the high level that they obtain those at in their wrestling, and then attitude and confidence that they have in the, oh, you want me to throw? Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
And it's very seldom in our sport do you get some immediate feedback like that. So it's some of the funnest, because so many coaches in your state have done the right things.
Yeah.
These athletes know all of the fundamental foundations. And so applying those fundamental foundations underneath a different rule set is really all we're doing there.
Mm-hmm.
So
what do we have to do? I mean, I've talked to different people who think that for us to be able to compete with the Russians and the Bulgarians and the Hungarians and folks like that, do we need to start Greco earlier, or can we compress time and make those jumps? What's the philosophy there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's multiple ways up the mountain.
Yeah.
I think for certain athletes, and again, each athlete, as we know, I mean, by the time they get to the world scene, up in senior and U23 levels, those athletes, they know how to train. They know what works for them. They're pretty standardized by that time.
Mm-hmm.
And they've taken whatever the standardized training was, and now they've moved to a point of, autonomy where they're doing it. It's coming from them. A lot of their training regimen, what they're thinking, how they're acting, the choice and their decision making that they're doing in their movements, it's all based on them. And that's why that personal coach has to be such an important part in their life, because there it's one-on-one.
Yeah.
But that all started somewhere. And it started somewhere in a room of 50 or 60 athletes learning basic skills, and the coach taking the time to do that. And it starts out almost cookie cutter, right? But then it moves and transfuses into what happens all the time in the state of Oklahoma, where all of a sudden you get these customizable plans that's coming in.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain things that if you're going to wrestle in your state, you better be good at these things, because everybody's good at those certain basics. As a high school coach, one of the things I did was, I took down 8 managers. We had 8 mats at the state tournament. You would take 8 managers down. They would all have a camera, and then they would all break down notes. When were things scored? What scored them? And the 2 rounds I really paid attention to was the quarters and the semis. And so, because what works in the quarters and semis, and then we try to cut out a lot of the things that, you just didn't see. If you saw them score in the quarters and semis, those were the advancement rounds that were going to make or break a program and an athlete. So that's what we focused on. And I think that you can go into any state that has that deep culture in it, whether it's PA, Ohio, New Jersey, Oklahoma, Illinois, any of those states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, any of those states, and you're going to see patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's because there's a standard. You either measure up to that standard or you fail. Now, take that back to your question about overseas. So part of what we have to do is take the athletes that we have, whatever level they're at, but then put them with foreign athletes as early as possible, because there's going to be things that they have not seen before, very much like what we see regionally. I mean, I know that as an official, I could go to one part of the United States and I would see one move over and over again.
Yeah.
And then I would see another one and going to someplace else. And with that, there's regional actions. And it's because that's who you're wrestling with. And like we talked about with Oklahoma, if you do not understand those basics in your own state, you will have a really, really rough road.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that's, Rhett's went overseas with, a gentleman that a few times. And I asked him about the Russians. I'm like, what was their style? He goes, well, here I can get away with upper body and I can get to my underhook, whatever. Mm-hmm. Over there, he goes, I went back to my Oklahoma style because I knew I had a shot at least beating them on my feet,
Right.
But he said the way they train, it's pretty straightforward and it's all business. It's been some good experiences. So I think I agree. I think if we can get our Oklahomans overseas, well, in the whole country for that matter, but
sure.
But if we can get our Okies overseas and get and experience some of this, and hopefully this COVID, hopefully we end this thing into where we can open up the travel a little bit, we can create some opportunities in Oklahoma to go overseas or bring them over here. I think it'd be a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is, I think that we have such great athletic individuals in America that we see things out of these young athletes almost every day that, like if we were doing this interview 10 years ago and someone said, well, let's step over a wizard. I mean, about everybody would have said, no, 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 you do not step over a wizard. You may win every once in a while against somebody that's not that good, but that will not work. Well, I don't know that we say those things now.
No.
Because you see a lot of people, they've got an actual technique on how to step over a wizard and not pay the price.
Yeah.
And so, I think that it's just like everything else. I mean, the athletes are getting better because they're being coached. And again, when you have a culture like Oklahoma, in some states, you have a lot of high school coaches that are literally second generation. They were the first generation that was coached by an actual person that had wrestled. There are many states where wrestling came into their state in the 70s. And unfortunately, what happens is they had a bunch of coaches that had never wrestled. They just took up the sport, walked in, and they were great people of character and strong will, and they showed those kinds of things, and they had wrestlers that were in shape. But as far as wrestling, but then when you have a culture that has been built on generations, then again, there's that expectation that comes in too.
I was going to say that expectation
you're expected to do well.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not even really spoken about. It's just
no,
the expectation's there, and they know it. I mean, yeah.
And again, it breeds pressure, but pressure is either going to make or break you. And at some point you have to be able to handle the pressure. Sure. Well, if you take those basics, I mean, one of the issues that we've had in recent years is, I mean, there was a couple of years ago where 6 of our 10 athletes had never been overseas.
Oh, wow.
Their first tournament they were ever in was the World Championships.
Oh, man.
Now, we wouldn't do that in America. We wouldn't take an athlete and say, you know what, I've never traveled you before, but we're going to go to the Olympic trials.
Yeah.
That's not how the world works. But yet,
what level was it at? What level was it at?
That was a cadet level.
Oh, cadet level. Yeah.
Right. And then in recent teams, I mean, we've had 2 teams in the last 5, 2 teams in the last 4 that we had 100% turnover. So we had 100% brand new guys. And I can tell you that there's a difference, and there's a difference. When you have 2 people that's already been there and done that, they're the reason why teams spend money on older athletes sometimes that might not be able to produce like they once did, but what they can do in the clubhouse and what they can do off that bench.
Yeah.
Because as coaches, the athlete's going to look right at us and go, Coach, I'm great. I feel good, and that you could drop dimes through their eyes because their pupils are huge.
Oh, yeah.
And you're like, okay, you are not right, but that's okay. I know you're trying to be as right as you can be, but they've all of a sudden looked out there and said, that's really deep water. Mm-hmm. And if you've got just 1 or 2 people that's already been there, they'll look right at it and go, my first Worlds, I was terrified. Yeah. You just got to go out and be ready to fight. Or you've got to, as you're running up, you've just got to be excited about all the movements that you're going to create. Now, where they go, but again, if you're confident and you've got basic skills and the attitude and the pressure's been there before, this pressure's not new.
Yeah.
So all those intangibles that end up being, sometimes unfortunately called soft skills, those are the real skills. And those are developed over time. So I don't know, and I don't think you were bringing it up, but I don't think there's a hack. There's not a shortcut to it, obviously. Yeah. But I do believe that there are certain things that are so transferable. So.
Yeah, I think it probably helps us a lot. I mean, America as a whole, we travel quite a bit in the States. I mean,
right.
Especially high school wise, that gives us a little bit. But so when we go over there, what are you seeing like on the cadet junior when we?
And you bring up such a great point right there, mm-hmm. Coach, is that when we the continent and you drop it inside the United States, it's not that big.
Yeah.
I mean, the Western United States would take care of most of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you are traveling, when you can get on a train and in 45 minutes be in a different country, I mean, again, it's one thing to go across state lines and all that, but it's America. I mean, we believe in America. And so there are differences, and we've already brought up, and we talked about regional differences in the sport. Well, in these nations, especially in Greco-Roman wrestling, you know, I work with an Italian coach who has been hired by Hungary to coach there in Budapest. And, you know, this coach tells me that now she works with the women's programs there. And I act as her mentor in a UWW program and Wasala. And so working with her, it was amazing. 2 weeks ago, we're on a mentoring call, and she says, you know, my biggest problem right now is that I get these girls out of Greco-Roman programs, and then I have to reprogram them a little bit, you know? And I'm like, okay, say that again. So she said, so what they're doing now is they are paying these coaches, these Greco coaches, to come in with the athlete and spend 2 weeks at a camp learning parts of the freestyle.
Interesting.
Okay. So then that way, when they go back, then the girls will be allowed, the women will be allowed to shoot on legs and not stay in hand fight scenarios as much. And so I look at that and say, that's our life upside down in America.
Right.
You know?
That's what it's like. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No.
So how big is Greco-Roman in girls over in Europe? I mean,
and again, it's, you know, it's there, but it's not organized as much, right? I mean, they're trying to grow their sport right now, and their avenue is through UWW. So it's going to be freestyle. Mm-hmm. But when the bulk of the coaches and many of the top coaches are Greco-Roman based coaches, mm-hmm. you know, you can go into any of those Soviet nations. I mean, but now here's the deal, though. They're great in both, right? They're great in Greco, and they're also great in freestyle.
Yeah.
But I think that's what gives us hope here, is that the transference of skills is it's obtainable. What we've got to do, though, is make it to where it becomes, you know, popular enough with growing our numbers. Mm-hmm. Because without growing our numbers, though, again, even if you have a small but talented pool of athletes, you and I both know it's not the same as you see. I mean, when you look at just how tough the age divisions are right now in folk style wrestling and how deep they are. I mean, you can go to a tournament and it doesn't matter who you draw. You could be the number 1 seed, but you could draw somebody that is completely unseeded. You just haven't seen that person yet,
right?
Male or female. Yeah. But they've got unbelievable skills. And mm-hmm. so that depth is what makes everybody, you know, work a little longer, put a little more time in, a little more intensity within that time, and then making sure they're doing all the basics of training, whether it's strength management, weight management, nutrition, all of that. When athletes are winning and they don't have to do everything, get proper rest, do all that, and they're just getting down the road, well, they're going to keep going down that road until something bad happens.
Yep.
And then they're going to say, all right, or the coach is going to say, look, these habits are not going to get us where we want to be. And so that's where, you know, again, there are definite challenges there, but there's also some real lines of hope.
Yeah.
In what we're doing.
Yeah, it makes me think, I mean, as I'm listening to you, and I think of Oklahoma, we have you know, obviously we're good in folk style. I mean, but we have a certain school of thought from certain folks that folk style is over and then that's over. And so I think if we can grow the numbers in Oklahoma, I mean, first of all, if we can grow the numbers in Oklahoma in terms of wrestling, period, in USA wrestling, but also grow the numbers in freestyle and Greco, and then specifically Greco. I mean, I think Greco transfers over to folk style, and I think, you know, folk style and will transfer over into Greco. You and I have talked on the phone about the grind of folk style definitely helps in freestyle and Greco, but boy, Greco can sure be a game changer in folk style for some people.
Right. I mean, we know there's a difference between those three styles, but at the end of the day, it's still two athletes.
Yeah.
You're both working out of a positive position that they can launch out of.
Right.
And freestyle and Greco just promotes a little more launch need. I mean, if you cannot create lift and rotation in Greco, then you're not going to make it.
Right.
But if you look at those 7 basics, and the top end of those 7 basics is back step, back arch, because we're saying that you have to be able to pivot on one foot with someone in your arms. So you're going to hit a back step, you're going to level change, hit a back step. And at that point that you hit that, you have to be loaded. You have to be in a capture position to where you can go, because if you don't, then that person's going to counter. And so, again, how many times are we going to get our athletes in those moments? And it all happens sometimes as simple as you've got a great wrestling room, and all of a sudden somebody shows back up from going out to college for a little while and coming back or whatever, and they've wrestled Greco. And all it takes is one person in that room. And then, because on the way out the door one day, he looks over and says, "And I watched you wrestle last week, and your lift returns were amazing. Guy did 7 stand-ups on you. The second he started up, you just put your hips in, lifted, returned him to the mat. There was no chance he was going to escape you. Do you realize that with what you can already do, you could transfer that over to Greco and move mountains?" And so, but it takes somebody being in the room. And as long as everybody in the room is still thinking, well, I'm looking for a better shot. I'm looking for a better way to get to legs. And so, those are all factors. And again, the neat thing about Greco that even in Oklahoma right now is really experiencing, I believe, is that it doesn't take a lot to move the needle. The numbers aren't this large body of people. And so you can, and the other factor is just when you go to a tournament, if the tournament is, there's a lot of tournaments, they only host freestyle. But if you can choose the tournaments where you can get both, then you're going to start seeing a climb. And then at some point, those athletes are going to say, wait a second, I'm in a great state of wrestling. I understand wrestling. And now I understand this Greco enough that I'll go to a world team trial.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I know we've been on for quite a while here, but we just wanted to bring you on, Zach, and we were talking about that. We wanted to bring a Greco-centric person on, and what better place, in person. We'd love to get you here to do some training at some point. I know that.
Looking forward to it. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when it opens up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, before I let you go, what is there any other, closing thoughts, or, for a young person wanting to pursue Greco that they haven't been able to do it because maybe they're scared, or maybe they're just, they're not educated about it yet. Do you have any advice for folks wanting to really go after Greco?
I just think, first of all, wrestlers in general are very courageous athletes because they go out by themselves. They shake hands with somebody their weight, and then they both start. And that right there puts them in a area of courageousness that most people at their age at that time, they just have never been. Think about how many times you hear something as simple as, I don't want to be in public in a leotard.
Yeah.
Something as simple as that. Yeah. And you think, hold on a second, But wrestlers, they just, that's not how they think. And so if you have a group of people that it's all based on courage and action, and yet there's something inside them that's saying, ooh, I don't know about that. I would think that would be the reason to run towards it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so I don't know. I think that I really believe that's going to happen. And really all it takes is what you mentioned, a half hour ago. You've got people in your state. I mean, there might not be a better example when you look at was a match in high school. He went to OU and became a 4-time All-American, and he was a finalist. But the other 3 years, he got his hand raised on the last match of the year at the 3rd place position. 4-time All-American, and then he turns around and the things that he's 4-time U.S. Open champion, I mean, in freestyle. And so now you look at what he's done in Greco with making a world team.
Yeah.
2 years. I mean, you don't find very many people that have a closed triangle like he does, and he's in your state.
Yeah.
And so that's a great example to anyone that if you like to compete and you want to keep evolving, I can think of every high school coach talks push-pull at some point. And I don't know that anyone has a better reverse gear than a Greco wrestler, because our scores are behind us. Almost everything we do, the scores that really matter are behind us. An arm spin, I start facing this way, but I'm going to be facing that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
speaking of, we got Coach Forbes on, who just gave a comment here. Love Coach.
Well, that whole family is awesome. And so I'm so happy for them. But see, they're a prime example. What Coach has done, and it's a matter of putting your son or other athletes in a car and then getting them to where they need to be.
Oh yeah.
And if that happens and you're in a competitive state like you guys are with the culture that we've talked about today, good things, not good things, but great things will happen. Yeah.
Yeah. I think his son's got a bright future.
Oh yeah. Yes.
He's a tough kid. We've trained with him a lot. So
right.
Good people.
Well, and you've got out of state people. Billy Sullivan.
Yeah.
He comes from Nevada. He comes there because of Coach Hazewinkle and Greco.
Yeah.
Right. And so he has definite plans of making world teams. And so it's and sometimes we don't see that when we're in our own state. But when you have people from out of state that have Greco tradition and background, and they're moving to your state because
that's a big thing.
It's got a hotbed to it.
Yeah.
We have to recognize our own hotbed, right?
Sure.
So that's pretty neat.
Well, Coach Mayabb, I appreciate you coming on again. If you want to really get to see Coach Mayabb, go to YouTube. I was looking at some of his videos before I got on here, and some really good technique, sound. Just, I mean, there's just almost a science to it, that the way you teach. And I love watching, what you're doing. And when we had you in Tulsa, it was great too. So like I said, I've said a couple of times, I'd love to have you back. And
I'll be back.
We really
about it.
Coming on here, and I know you and Coach Randall have a good relationship.
Yes.
So I think big things are happening for Oklahoma, obviously from our depth, but
it's, I've assured him, you guys are a targeted state for us.
Yeah.
USA Wrestling.
Well, cool. Well, Coach Mayabb, thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming on.
You bet. Thank you. Appreciate it.